That's right. We're back. Brennen and I are back together to take a look at a very intriguing, interesting, whichever word you want to use, Green Bay Packers undrafted rookie. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, what the heck are we doing? Well, we've gone through each of the Green Bay Packers draft picks. We finished that already with Kyle and Hill recently, and we've gone through and discussed each of those draft picks, where areas that they're good at, areas that they can improve upon, and honestly, the discussion in some of the videos just kind of went in all different directions. So, but a lot of good information. We got a lot of positive feedback as well. If you've missed any of that, head to my YouTube page, check them all out, hit subscribe while you're there, leave a comment, all that good stuff. I greatly appreciate it. My name's Paul Brettel. My work's over at Dairyland Express and Cheesehead TV. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And joining me, as I said, is the great Brennen Roop. Brennen, tell the folks where they can find you. And of course, how are you doing?
I'm good. I think, first of all, I think you're using the word great kind of loosely. But you can find my work over at GameOnWisconsin.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Roy_Roop.
Well, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I mean, it's sunny outside. I wish it would kind of cool down, but I'm doing great. Excited to hear about Jordan Love slinging the football around today at minicamp, so that was awesome.
That was very exciting. I was obviously very happy for that as well. But today we are going to take a look at, as I said, Christian Uphoff, the safety from Illinois State. And before we dive into him specifically, I wanted to take a look at the UDFA class in general, because I think it's going to be trickier this year for those players to find a spot on the 53-man roster. Reason I say that is because there's just really not a lot of spots up for grabs. This is a Green Bay Packers team that was 13-3 last year. We all know that. They went to the NFC Championship game. We all know that too. And they're bringing back a very large core of that team from a year ago. That's basically what this offseason was. It was Brian Gutekunst find a way to run it back. They didn't cut Preston Smith. They re-signed Aaron Jones. They re-signed Kevin King, Chandon Sullivan, Big Bob Tunyon, Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing some players as well. But this is very much the same group that was around in 2020. So there's a lot of familiar players who had key roles on the team. And it's not like this was a bad team last year. This was the best team during the regular season, in my opinion. I'm sure most will agree, in the NFL. They should have went to the Super Bowl. They should have won the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, they didn't. So for those reasons, Brandon, do you think it's going to be more difficult to carve out a role, or do you think it's still going to be there's still that same opportunity for these guys?
Yeah, I think you've hit it perfectly that this is going to be a year where I think undrafted free agents, it's going to be hard to make this team, mainly because, like you said, everyone's back. The guys that aren't back, you think of Corey Linsley. Well, they drafted his replacement in the second round. No undrafted free agent's going to beat out that guy for the starting job. So I think it's already hard enough to make the roster as an undrafted free agent, just because you have to be perfect. You have to hit the ground running right when you get the minicamp, OTAs, training camp. You just have to be on your best at all times. It's not like you're a first-round pick where, if you have a bad day, well, chalk it up to a bad day. If you have a bad day, if you're Bailey Gaither, you're probably not going to beat out Equanimeous St. Brown for a spot. So I just think in general, it already is hard enough to make the roster as an undrafted free agent. But now with so many guys back from that 13-3 team, like you talked about, I don't see an easy road for any of these guys to make the roster. Now, that's not to say that they're not going to, but it's just I think it's going to be challenging.
The one caveat I'll throw out there to basically just contradict everything that I said was if we would have rewinded a year ago to this time, had this same discussion, I would have said the same thing, because you know what? There aren't those practices, those in-person practices for those rookies, which those guys need, especially to make those impressions. Because like you said, they don't have the draft stock, the draft capital to lift them up. It's you got to go show the coaches what you can do on the field. And due to COVID-19, all of that was very limited last year. There wasn't preseason games. But then what happens week one? Chris Barnes gets called up. Yeah. Chris Barnes' role expands as the year goes on. By week 15 against Carolina, he's the Mike linebacker. He's wearing the green dot. He's calling the plays on the defensive side of the ball. So that is, like I said, to contradict what I said, because last year really was a year as well where it would have been very difficult on this Green Bay Packers team to make the roster. But he ended up playing having a big impact on this team throughout the year.
And like you said, Chris Barnes is a guy that, again, it just goes to show that right now none of us know anything.
Mhm.
An injury could happen to a player. Maybe Darnell Savage gets hurt. That opens the door for Christian Uphoff to make the roster as the safety 3, or maybe Wallace people and he's the starting safety next to Amos, Adrian Amos first week. So it's just none of us know anything right now. The road, I think, is going to be difficult if there are no injuries, but there's always going to be a Tremont Williams, Sam Shields that's going to come out of nowhere and blow the coaches away. So.
And in addition to just looking at who the players are, what they bring, it's also important to look at the roster that they're trying to make. And one reason why Uphoff could absolutely be one of these UDFAs who makes the roster is because the safety position, obviously other than Amos and Savage, it's wide open. That safety 3 role is up for grabs. And before we started this, I checked their initial 53-man roster from a year ago. They kept 5 safeties. So if they do that again this year, maybe they'll keep 4, 5. There's at least 2 or 3 spots up for grabs. So when we're looking at which UDFAs have a chance, in addition to just what they bring as players, where are the openings on the roster? And there's absolutely a few of them here at the safety position. So the other safeties, in addition to the big 2 that we know, Will Redman, Vernon Scott, Henry Black, Uphoff, of course, and then Innis Gaines. He was signed in January, I believe, to a futures deal. He was a 2020 undrafted rookie out of TCU as well, like Vernon Scott. Didn't really stick anywhere last year. But what is your overall impression of that group there? Is there any one of those guys that stands out? Because I just went through and said it's kind of up for grabs, that safety 3 pick. Is there one of those guys that you like above the other? Or what are your thoughts?
You kind of already touched on kind of some of the stuff that I was going to mention too, is that the safety 3 spot's wide open. So there is an opening there for him to grab one of those spots. But if I have to like someone, I think Vernon Scott's someone that in the role last year did kind of flash some potential. TCU under Gary Patterson has kind of become not a DBU, but they've produced some good NFL corners, DBs. So I think he is someone that could be kind of the hybrid role, maybe a Raven Green type situation in Joe Barry. I know the defense is going to be different, so maybe that's not going to be a position that is going to be utilized. But I think if there's a safety 3, I think right now it's Vernon Scott and then the field. I think with Will Redman, you kind of know what he is. He's a special teams guy. Whenever he's on the field defensively, you kind of hold your breath a little bit. Where Uphoff, I think there's just a higher ceiling, bigger potential. I know we're going to get into is what he does well and everything, but I just think if you're going to keep 5 safeties, my guess is it's going to be Vernon Scott, Uphoff, and then maybe Will Redman or Henry Black. I think those are going to be the 5 that they keep next to the big 2.
The one thing I want to add about Will Redman is that Jerry Gray has said that right now, because they're trying to figure out that star, that nickel position. And he said there's 4 or 5 guys that they're looking at, and their goal is to narrow it down to 1 or 2 by the time the regular season comes, as the guys that they're going to heavily rely on. And I'm not going to say he's going to finish there, but I do think that Will Redman is one of those players in that 4 or 5 group that they're heavily looking at. A third of his snaps, and I know it's going to frustrate a lot of fans, but a third of his snaps that he took last year were in the slot. Granted, he had his ups and downs there, but last year was also his first year seeing that level of playing time as well. So I know he wasn't a rookie last season, but they're obviously hoping that he can take a step forward and on this team, whether it's in that role or not. And Andy Herman, who's been at the Packers OTAs at these mini camp practices, he says that Will Redman's out there quite a bit in their nickel and dime packages. So it seems like they're giving him the opportunity to try to stick, and fans are just going to have to block out that whiffed interception from the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it too. Last year was the first year that he played a significant amount of snaps. And that was a year where he didn't have a traditional offseason just like everyone else. So to me, again, being the optimist instead of being the pessimist, I know I kind of threw him under the bus a little bit in the last segment, but I think there is room where he could possibly become a better player than he showed. I mean, again, recency bias, the last thing I think of is when he dropped the punts to get an interception. So again, was he better than that? I'm sure he was. Just that's what it's burning my memory right now with Will Redman.
Yep, absolutely. One thing I want to mention just in general about the safety position is obviously, Joe Barry's the defensive coordinator now. It's going to operate differently than what it did under Mike Pettin. And in the Cheesehead TV draft guide this year, Ross Uglum, he did a tremendous job of breaking down what this defense is supposed to look like under Joe Barry, what we expect it to based on what Brandon Staley did in Los Angeles last year. And he went position by position. And really the two big takeaways for the safeties is that the Rams played more too high safety than any team in football. And they also played with the safeties very close to the line of scrimmage, either the most in football or very close to that. So this safety group, we're going to see the too high look often. These guys are going to be expected to produce and help in the run game. They're there with the linebacker to be reinforcements. Mm-hmm. So they need solid tacklers in that regard. So as we look in these guys who are back end of the roster players, and safety three isn't back end of the roster, that person's going to see a lot of playing time. But as we look at who's going to win that battle as training camp, as preseason unfolds, those are two very important things to keep in mind. Their coverage ability from that standpoint, but also what can they do against the run. And going back to what you said again about Vernon Scott, TCU under Gary Patterson, they run a lot of that too high safety look. So he brings that versatility like you mentioned. So he's an exciting player in that regard as someone who can fill in. We are here to
I'm just going to touch on the TCU thing. That's a big reason why I thought Trevon or Darius Washington were going to be guys that the Packers maybe looked at, just because it's kind of a similar style defense that they're going to be playing. But now you can go on for Christian if you want to.
Yes, because, of course, that's why we are here this evening. One other note on Uphoff, Sports Illustrated, excuse me. They have their NFL Draft Bible where they go through and have their draft analysts put together their scouting reports on that. And one little nugget that I wanted to pull out was that the analyst who went through Uphoff's tape and all that, he noted he's an ideal too high safety in the NFL. So, again, as we're looking for fit, that's a big reason right there where he could stand out. So Uphoff he really has just 1 year of playing experience at Illinois State. The MVC canceled the 2020 season due to COVID-19. But that 15 games in that one season, incredibly impressive. Put up 8 pressures. On 39 targets, he allowed a completion rate of only 51%, 2 interceptions, 8 pass breakups. He played 238 snaps from the box, 460 as the free safety, again in that too high look, important to note. And then 234 in the slot. So displayed that versatility. So Brennen, Christian Uphoff, what does he do well?
You kind of touched on a lot of these, just a lot of production when those 15 starts in 2019. He's got center field like range, fluid movement, special teams returnability, which is another big thing for him, is that he has the ability to return kicks. He played on coverage units in college. I think he returned 1 touchdown in 2018 as a special teams guy. He can come downhill. He plays well against the run. Now, he does kind of have the Clinton Dix syndrome where he comes in flying kind of out of control. He needs to kind of work on his technique a little bit. I know he had a lot of missed tackles in 2019, but he's a willing guy to come up there and hit. He played in the slot too, I think. I think you mentioned that in Pro Football Focus. So he's got the coverage ability. He's got good ball production. He's someone that I think if he did play in 2020, he's a guy that I think would have been drafted on day 3. So I think the talent is there. It's just I don't think the scouts had enough film on him to draft him, I guess, day 3. So I think the Packers got someone that could be the next – I know we talked about how it's going to be hard for them to make the roster, but I think this is a guy, if anybody, could be the success story that the Packers have with undrafted free agents.
Right, and as we discussed, who he's competing with at that safety position – there is a lot of inexperience. We discussed Will Redman, his really 1 year seeing significant snaps was last year. Vernon Scott's a 7th-round pick who saw, I think, 90 snaps total. Henry Black was a UDFA last year, saw minimal playing time as well. And it's not even the same defense for these guys where you could look at, well, they got a year of experience under Mike Pettin's defense under their belt that should give them a leg up. This is brand new for everyone involved. Not to say that just being in the NFL and being on the team last year doesn't help. It certainly does, but it almost seems like it's a fairly close race to how it's going to turn out. And it's really going to just be dependent on training camp, preseason, what happens on the field versus those guys having any sort of built-in advantages because they've been here already. Yeah,
you touched on it. We're going to sound like a broken record here, but those guys behind those top 2, there's not really a lot to pound the table for, say this is the guy that's going to be. Everyone, it's fair game right now. So I think Uphoff is going in there And I think he has a real shot to crack the roster. Now it's just, can he pick up the defense fast enough and can he become a better tackler? There's a reason why he was undrafted. It's just he can't put it all together to slow things down.
So I think you touched on possibly one of the things you'll mention here, becoming a better tackler, but what are some areas that he needs to improve upon?
It just comes with playing time. I think he is slow to read and react. I think he sometimes gets caught looking at the quarterback too much instead of handling his zone coverage ability. Again, the tackling thing I think was the biggest red flag for me, just because he comes downhill so fast, plays a little out of control. Now, again, that's all coachable stuff. You want a guy that's going to be aggressive. If you're going to be a guy that's going to crack the roster as an undrafted free agent, you better be a good tackler, and that's something that he's going to have to work on.
Especially in this defense, as we mentioned, where the safeties, a big job of theirs is to help in the run game. So tackling is going to be at a premium for these guys. So you already touched on who you think those final three are going to be. It was Redman, Uphoff, and Black. Is that correct? Or Scott, sorry.
If I had to be a betting man, yeah, I think, again, Uphoff is going to face an uphill climb, but it's against guys that don't have a ton of experience. It's not like he's trying to beat out an 8-year veteran for the safety free spot. These guys are all fairly inexperienced. I think if there's an undrafted free agent that's going to make the roster, I think it's going to be him or the San Jose State wide receiver, Bailey Gaither. But I think those are the two that I think would be the guys that are going to make the roster.
I agree that out of the UDFAs, and there was only 7 or 8 of them, which again points to that this roster saw very little turnover. Usually there's, I think, 13, 14, 15 undrafted free agents brought in, but the Packers had so many guys from last year already here that they only signed those 7 or 8. So I agree. I think Uphoff has the best chance. I'm gonna cop out here a little bit. I think that he will be on the roster. I think that he could see some playing time, but I don't think it's going to be initially. I think Will Redman, where there's smoke, there's fire, and he's getting all these reps. Like I said, I believe he's in that discussion for the slot. Whether he gets that or not, we'll see. But where there's smoke, there's fire. So I think that he's on the roster. I'm just going to throw that out there right now.
You're talking about fire, and it's going to be hilarious when the Packers roll out week 1 with Will Redman and Kevin King as 2 of the starters in the secondary for week 1.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Packer fans everywhere will be thrilled. So I think he's on there. I think Vernon Scott is as well. Like I said, that TCU connection with the 2 high safety, and honestly, call it bias. I just really like him. I liked him even before last year's draft. And then so it comes down to Black, Uphoff, and Ennis Gaines for that final spot. Could be wrong, but I don't think that Gaines is really going to be a factor in this. We got a dog. We got that chipper.
Yeah, my work is at home, so the dog's freaking out a little bit. But yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I think Gaines, it's going to be hard pressed just because he hasn't played in a while. Now, Uphoff hasn't played in a while either. So,
and for me, that's going to be the determining factor. No, Henry Black does not have a ton of NFL experience, obviously, or playing time in regular season games. But Uphoff only having that 1 year at Illinois State, and it wasn't even in 2020. He's coming off a year basically away from the game just because they didn't have their season. So I'm going to chalk it up to that. That's what I'm going with at this point. Obviously, we'll have to see how it turns out, but I think we both agree that when it comes to a UDFA cracking the roster, he's our guy.
Yep, definitely.
Awesome. Brennen, as always, I appreciate you joining me. Everyone who tuned in, I really hope that you enjoyed our discussion here for Christian Uphoff. As I said previously, head to the YouTube page, check out our previous combos, comment, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. My name's Paul Brettel. This is Brendan Roop. Until next time, friends, take care and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.